Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis. My name is Rick Urrutia, and I am here with my comrades Brian.
All right, howdy, everyone. Good evening.
And Jerry.
Sweet.
And we are bringing you this week's labor news.
Yeah, workers continue to be on the move across the country. We're happy to be here on We Rise Fighting tonight. It's always wonderful to be here with Rick and Jerry and our listeners, you. And we're here to talk about tonight labor news. There's a lot of activity going on across the country in terms of workers being on the move with strikes, direct actions, votes, a variety of other activities. So we're going to talk about that tonight. And I would just like to talk about, since I'm from Wisconsin, we had a wonderful act of solidarity that took place. The Family Farm Defenders, which are a longtime independent farmer organization, they extended solidarity to the United Auto Workers 180 on strike in Wisconsin. It's you can find the statement at the Family Farm Defenders website, but essentially to make a synopsis of the statement, that they issued their full solidarity to the workers on strike at Case New Holland. UAW 180 workers are on strike in Racine and Burlington, Iowa, local 807 of the UAW there. And they make tractors and farm implements. So the Family Farm Defenders, of course, use those, and they have expressed solidarity in their letter, and also they will be giving support concretely in all kinds of different ways. In tandem with that, we have the nurses in Austin, Texas, voted to have a union, and this is in the South. And last year, in Asheville, North Carolina, the nurses voted union. And in Minnesota, we just saw a strike, one of the largest strikes in U.S. history for healthcare workers in Minnesota. So nurses and other healthcare workers are on the move, not only in the Midwest, but also in the South and other locations as well. All right, so what do you got for us, Rick?
You know, going through some of the news online this week, I came across this Guardian article. It is titled New Striketober looms as U.S. walkouts increase and surge in union activity. And I thought it was a wonderful little recap of some of the stuff that's been happening as far as U.S. labor this year. You know, the article goes ahead and talks about how workers have won elections at Starbucks, Apple, Amazon, Chipotle, Trader Joe's, Google, REI, and Verizon. It talks about how union election petitions increased by 58% in the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 2022 versus 2021. It talks about a Gallup poll that puts public support for unions at 71% approval, apparently the highest since 1965. And again, this is all from the Guardian article. It references that Cornell University did a study, and as far as strikes in 2022, so far they've outpaced strikes in 2021. So in 2021, so far there have been 180 strikes versus 102 strikes last year at the same time. And last year, the number of strikes, the number of workers on these 102 strikes came to a total of 26,500 versus this year in the 180 strikes where it totals 78,000 workers. So interesting stuff happening. Another little thing that gets mentioned from the Cornell report in this article is that between August 15th and September 15th of this year, there have been 41 strikes in the US involving 32,000 workers. So that's just in 1 month, starting about 2 months ago. There were 32,000 workers that went on strike. Amongst the largest strikes in recent weeks, 15,000 nurses in Minnesota, 1,100 timber workers in Oregon. And that's, I think that's significant. Brian, comrades, you and I have talked about timber workers before, and, the position that they're in, being workers and having to support their family versus, some of them, I'm sure, are conscious that they're helping corporations tear the planet to the ground. So that's an interesting tension. always, and something I'd like to discuss further. Another large strike that was taking place was the 4,500 teachers in Columbus, Ohio, 6,000 teachers and staff in Seattle, 2,000 mental health workers in California, 1,200 casting plant workers in Indiana, 700 nursing home workers in Pennsylvania. Amongst the groups that have authorized strikes recently, it includes graduate workers at Clark University, 800 auto workers in Lordstown, Ohio, and still the 115,000 railroad workers may go on strike if they reject the tentative contract. So yeah, that was a really interesting article. I thought, this type of news is important, in particular in October, because October, capitalism, corporations, they really hype up this Black Thursday, or Black Friday rather, as they call it, where sales are going to happen and I've always thought of that as a great opportunity to strike or carry out some kind of workplace action, because so much money is involved. So I've been saying this for a minute. It's good to see it. It's really refreshing to see hopeful to see these types of numbers, especially just knowing that it's an increase from last year. So that's where, this general information is at from the Guardian article. Brian, what else you got on your plate?
Yeah, Rick, I was going to ask you, either in the article, your view of the reasons for these workers escalating their activities in terms of direct action, whether that be a strike or a formal strike, a wildcat strike, or you described a lot of activities there in your view or your readings. What have you found the workers are saying for why they're stepping up these actions and they're increasing?
It's from reading about some of these strikes, in some cases it's layoffs, in some cases it's wage increases, but just all around just economic hardship, so yeah, people just, we're watching rent increase from city to city across the nation, and do wages keep up with that? No. So yeah, I don't blame these workers for striking, and good for them for striking and taking action, to improve their economic condition. I think, as a lot of listeners wouldn't be surprised, I think that we should all get behind them, because an injury to one is an injury to all, and they're sticking their necks out there, in these hard economic times.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's noteworthy in the list that you read was typically in the U.S. It's interesting. This is coming from the Guardian, which is a paper from the U.K. Rarely do we see that kind of reporting from the United States, unless there's a massive or a huge strike, and even then it's skewed a lot of times. But a lot of these strikes or direct actions are happening in sectors that we haven't seen. This type of escalated activity, potentially maybe since the 30s or the 60s, but sectors such as what some would deem "quote unquote" fast food or healthcare sectors, or places like Amazon, or places that were formerly thought to be not being able to be unionized for a whole variety of different reasons. But these workers seem to be proving otherwise, that such as the Starbucks workers and others, that in fact these places can in fact be organized even under the most difficult conditions. And that's so. What is your response to that, Rick or Jerry?
Here, I'll chime in real quick. These are interesting times, and the three of us have talked about this a little bit, I think, not while recording, but, we've been trying to wrap our heads around what some of this is going to look like. Yeah, there is this increase in labor activity and unionization, but where is some of this going? Because, for instance, the Starbucks workers, it seems like they have the opportunity and possibly the need to organize a different kind of union, and it seems like, they have, again, the opportunity / need to organize independent unions that haven't been, defined or characterized in any way by the existing unions of the time, and so they don't have to be like bureaucratic. They don't have to be, where the leadership earns like 5 times the rank and file. It can be something different. It can be something democratic that embraces other types of social justice causes. So Yeah, I think that's one of the questions that it puts before us, when stuff is happening so quickly. Um, but I'm hopeful, just in the sheer activity. And it reminds me of that quote, that we've bounced around here several times. There's decades where nothing happens, and there's
Yeah.
weeks where decades happen. So to see a labor upsurge, either with institutionalized unions as they exist now, or with new independent unions, with new ideas, with greater democracy, with more social struggle, whatever direction it goes in. I'm excited by these numbers and the type of activity that's happening in the U.S. right now.
Key word from Rick was hopeful. I think a characteristic of the upsurge is that in a couple of the sectors we see young, low-paid workers in Starbucks and in some of the grocery stores like Trader Joe's and other places, Chick-fil-A, Chipotle, etc. And also the industry of higher education, where graduate student unions are just like tearing it up right now. I think you mentioned Clark University. They got their contract with the Teamsters. They're with the Teamsters, and they just won their contract. They're up here in Massachusetts. As we mentioned before last week, before 5,000 Boston University graduate students just dropped cars with SEIU 509. UE organized 3,500 graduate workers at MIT last year, and they're going after the remaining 4,000 workers in the unit soon. So what I'm talking about, this is a youth movement, among other things.
Yeah.
And so that bodes well for the future, because these are young people that have, a big future. And so whatever, however the clouds may look kind of cloudy right now, this is a good thing to look at. Today's youth movement is a union movement. To the extent that there is a youth movement, I think it's a union movement now in the country. So I'm happy for that, and great list you put together there, Rick.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm crediting, the Guardian, but yes, definitely handy for us. Also in the news, we got across a Market Watch article that reports that Facebook janitors are on strike with no end in sight. And that would be 250 workers in the Bay Area. Their greatest grievance is a layoff of 40% of their workforce. 40% of the workforce but they still have the same contracts apparently, and still have to produce the same amount of work. So, when I'm speaking to layoffs, this is the sort of thing that's happening. It's lean production. It's trying to squeeze more labor out of less workers. So I don't blame, these workers for going on strike. In particular, man, you think about it, Mark Zuckerberg, $26.8 million a year. That's his base salary. And just so y'all know, I got that from the company's proxy statement. If anyone ever wants to look up a CEO's salary, you go to a company's proxy statement. All right. There's a section that says executive compensation. There it is, directly from the horse's mouth, the CEO's salary. So yeah, how can you not keep enough workers on staff to produce a job, without exploitation, when you have a CEO that's making $26.8 million in 2021?
I think that in tandem with this all raises, in my view, like solidarity and the creative application of solidarity. There's a lot of models for this in the 30s and the 60s and the 70s when there's upsurges, but also today. And some of this is happening to some degrees. For example, the Teamster workers being in solidarity with Starbucks workers. But back to Wisconsin with the UAW 180 or the Burlington, Iowa strikers out at Case Holland, there could be a whole variety of different activities taking place, right? So you have the fast food workers, you have the farm, the workers who are making farm implements such as tractors, the family farm defenders, a lot of the like in Wisconsin and Iowa, for example, Iowa was the biggest hog producing plant in the entire country, if not the world. And that farm equipment made by these workers on strike is being used on those farms where the hogs are developed to be for slaughter. In Wisconsin, half of the dairy industry is upheld by Latino workers. So there could be a whole variety of solidarity in the future with the leadership that exists. We had a couple great interviews on this show already, such as the president of UAW Local 180, the executive vice president of the Vermont AFL-CIO, and they were talking a lot about international solidarity and the potential actions, creative actions that could come forth. Another example is international solidarity. These coffee beans that are produced in Latin America, Central America, Africa, and if we did the research, we could probably find either these UAW workers in Racine or Burlington, Iowa, are making some of those tractors that are producing, or farm implements that are producing that coffee, or related farm workers. So I think everything we're talking about tonight is not only just these individual strikes, but ways to build in all sectors across all workplaces to increase our strength as a class, as a working class,
Yep.
with women and people of color in leadership, the most militant in leadership, and it really raises discussions for the future. I mean, for example, just like think about what could happen in the scene. There could be farm workers coming to town driving tractors. You could have dairy workers coming onto the picket line. It could be quite something, and it's only an hour from Chicago. It's centrally located, 20 minutes from Milwaukee. It's right in the middle of the Midwest. So the potential for a lot of this is very real and very great. And especially as now there's 6 months on strike, we could really step it up. So I just wanted to raise some of these ideas because Jerry raised, and Rick, you as well, the hope that this inspires when one sector of workers goes out at a workplace, how that inspires others to get their courage and their bravery to go up against their bosses. This can also increase to a whole new level of solidarity and taking on the bosses, not just an individual boss, but also entire sectors potentially.
Just to repeat the call for solidarity, Brother Brian, that for anyone that hears this, listening to this podcast right now, don't forget, drop into your local Starbucks store, especially if they're unionizing. Ask for a cup of union strong coffee, get to know the workers there, find out if you can do anything for them, try to establish some relationships of solidarity with them. Nationally, we've settled into something of a stalemate with Starbucks, where on the one hand, there are lots of wildcat 1 and 2 day strikes going on from anywhere from Utah to Seattle to Atlanta to Boston, across the country. Simultaneously with that, Starbucks is refusing to get to the bargaining table, and the clock is ticking. That is to say, a year after a union wins its election and is certified as the bargaining agent, 1 year from that date, Starbucks is free to hire scabs in there and decertify that union. And you best believe that would be on their planning pages right now. So we've got to strengthen up these 320, 330 or 40 stores that are either unionized or are filing for elections, and get down with them now and show them some support, because it's going to be tough sledding ahead, but it's a struggle we can win and we must win.
And that, in addition to Jerry, there are Starbucks workers on strike in Buffalo, New York right now, and that's at the Elmwood Avenue location. So for our listeners on We Rise Fighting here, we're also, using this podcast to support our friends and our fellow workers in all kinds of different actions. So if you're in Buffalo, or if you just want to send a gift card or something, you can check that out at Starbucks Workers United Facebook page. And that's happening in Buffalo. There's a strike at the Elmwood Avenue location, but there's all kinds of other actions taking place across the country. And they're up at Starbucks Workers United Facebook page. And also there's more coverage at the More Perfect Union Facebook page as well.
Also got some news from the Communication Workers of America. They report that members of CWA locals 14842 and 14827, who work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, went on strike in response to some unfair labor practices carried out by management. They were joined by members of the Teamsters and Pressmen's Union. These workers design, print, distribute, advertise sales, and do accounts receivable for the newspaper. And they have been without a contract since March 2017, and have not received a pay raise in 16 years. 16 years. Again, going back to like the cost of rent, how much has rent increased in the past 10 years?
Mhm.
But if there's one thing that can remain stagnant, it's wages.
Mhm. Yeah, and Pittsburgh is a Midwest East Coast city, and it's in the process of gentrification, and even more so than a lot of other places. Rent there and cost of living has skyrocketed in the past 5 to 10 years as well. So that's absolutely outrageous. So we also have raised on the show here, We Rise Fighting, the role of labor in the U.S. South. So there's a variety of different activities, as we mentioned, the nurses previously, the win for the vote in Asheville and recently in Austin, Texas, and now they're moving forward with bargaining, hopefully. Of course, these hospitals that they're organizing, the National Nurses United, the hospitals always put up resistance against that, but the Southern Workers Assembly is and other community and labor friends of the NNU in Asheville are helping them there. And in Austin, Texas as well, they're moving towards demanding to bargain a contract in that location. Also, the Southern Workers Assembly there's a variety of United Electrical Workers campaigns happening in North Carolina. And during COVID, the worst parts and effects of COVID, it was literally United Electrical Workers, the Southern Workers Assembly, and other labor and community organizations that literally kept thousands of workers alive by demanding safety provisions. And some of these, like UE is in North Carolina, collective bargaining is illegal, but it goes to show, as we talked about previously when talking about Brother Saladi Muhammad building the UE there and Black Workers for Justice, and then the Southern Workers Assembly, that if we're united in labor and community formations with the community, with students, with parents, and all those who are affected by low wages and the boss's attacks, unite, we can make advances. And so even in states like North Carolina and Texas, where anti-labor laws and policies are in effect, and they're extremely vicious and racist and rooted in Jim Crow, if we're united, we can make advances, and they're actually taking place across the U.S. South in a variety of ways. And it's important to note that, as one of our previous brothers who was on the show as well, Eddie Childs, mentioned that the South is absolutely critical to organize. As in Charlotte, North Carolina, it's the largest banking center outside of Wall Street, and many Fortune 500 companies are now based in the South. In fact, many over the past year have moved to Texas. AT&T headquarters is here, and many others have moved from California to Texas for low taxes. The anti-labor laws on the books, but there's still organizing happening, and that's extremely critical. And also there's a variety of migrant and immigrant rights organizing happening as well across the South, especially in places like North Carolina, where there's some organizational apparatus to assist the farm workers.
It may not seem so at first glance, but the material conditions are favorable now for union organizing in the U.S. And it's when you look at the graduate student workers unions that are being organized, they're chiefly being organized by unions that were one time exclusively industrial unions, like United Auto Workers, United Electrical Workers, and the Teamsters. Back in the 30s, when there was the biggest strike wave, well, the biggest organizing wave, and later on a strike wave that we've ever seen in this country, industrial unions had to replace craft union organizing because of the material conditions on the ground, which meant that unskilled, semi-skilled workers, low-paid workers were now entering the workforce and replacing craft workers. And so the CIO came along and adapted its organizing style to fit those new conditions. Today, there are very few entry points to organizing units that have low density, like 30, 40, 50 workers. Most unions will not bother to organize workplaces with that number of workers in them. But nevertheless, those workers are pretty much self-organizing themselves. Starbucks is really a self-organizing union campaign right now. And graduate workers are also, well, they're getting some significant help from international unions, but the material conditions on the ground are shifting. So the labor movement of today and tomorrow is not going to look like the labor movement of the 1960s or even the 1970s. It can't. It has to change or die. And that's what happened in the 30s. It changed and it grew. So right now we're seeing early signs of growth in the labor movement. So get out there and support your local Starbucks store. I'm going to keep saying it until I get hoarse.
Cool. No, you're good. Keep saying it.
Yeah. And I think that is, speaking of the hope that we talked about before, in terms of, there was a writer named Sam Marcy that wrote a book called Hightech, Low Pay, and this was back in the early 1980s, that the more the high tech, low pay, and we're seeing in these service sectors, we're seeing in higher education, especially at the UAW, among other unions that are organizing in higher ed. This is a much more diverse, much more international workforce that's lending all kinds of resources and all kinds of organizing expertise and knowledge to the U.S. labor movement. For example, these graduate student workers, they come from all over the world, and they come with organizing. They come with organizing experience, and we're seeing this in the service sector, the migrant workers, and this really, bodes well for the future of the labor movement in the U.S. because this has been a big challenge within U.S. labor. The chauvinism, as we've talked about a lot, and will continue to do so. That if the U.S. labor movement needs to advance, not only do what we've been talking about here, it really needs to have an international orientation. And there's many, many workers that do have this and are making extremely critical and important contributions for the future of labor in this country and really worldwide.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know if you remember, but for me, for our listeners who don't know, Brian and I went to grad school together at the University of Massachusetts Labor Center. Jerry also went to to the same program just a little earlier. But yeah, one of my takeaways from the struggle there was you can't eat prestige. I think, yeah, people have to be reminded of that. Yeah, it's nice to have the prestigious ability or whatever it may be to be a graduate student, but that's not something you can eat, man. It also comes down to wage issues. How much are you getting paid for your research? How much are you getting paid to teach the classes? Stuff like that. So solidarity to graduate workers.
And I don't know if we've ever mentioned it on the podcast before, but there is something called the Emergency Workers Organizing Committee, EWOC, which is a campaign, is a program actually of the United Electrical Workers and the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. What it is you call them up, you're a worker somewhere and you want to organize, but you don't know how to do it. You feel like you're not sure what a union is, but you want to do something. You call up EWOC and they will attach a volunteer organizer to you and talk to you about your conditions on there. I've done a couple of these with EWOC, trying to help workers organize in hospitals in the Midwest and up here in Boston. And it's a great program because it provides an entry point for organizing, and it's further evidence of the desire for organizing that is coming from some quarters of the labor movement. And EWOC, Emergency Workers Organizing Committee, if you want to help somebody organize, give them a call. Or if you're listening to this and you want to you need help or want help organizing, call up EWOC.
That's cool. I didn't know about EWOC.
Yeah. They have 75 volunteer organizers spread around the country that each of them has got like 2 or 3 little campaigns they're trying to work on. So it's just another evidence that that there is something stirring about in the country, but it's somewhat hidden, but it's there. It is definitely there.
Moving forward with more news, I also have CNBC reporting that, excuse me, in the UK, a new wave of port labor strikes begins with massive impacts for Christmas supply chain. So apparently some port workers are going to be going on strike in the UK from October 11th to October 17th in a battle for wage gains to match record inflation in the UK. Speaking to the volume of this port, it's apparently $1 billion in trade is moved through this port in Liverpool per week. And the US is the top trade partner, representing 30% of Liverpool volume for this port. Again, ports, they always strike the imagination. And it seems as though with port strikes, the media always has a number for that, like $1 billion in 1 week, and, as we have said here on this program before, you got to learn how to look at that number, don't let it scare you. Don't let it think, well, then the workers need to cave. No, then the bosses need to cave. If this strike is costing the economy $1 billion per week, the bosses need to cave. Just give the workers the several $1,000s they want, for better health care, for better wages, and call it a day. Like it doesn't have to be all that, but it tells you the value of the workers' labor who work in the ports. Always interesting talking about ports. Always sparks the imagination, including sparking just the idea of, well, what if workers in the U.S. port workers in the U.S. went on strike on the East Coast? What would that look like? How quickly would that be resolved then?
Right, and the connection to the railroad unions as well, right? And Rick, you were going to talk about that, I think, a couple weeks ago, about the potential for a railroad workers' strike, which is directly connected to the ports, which is two sectors that are, the density of union membership is quite high compared to other sectors in the U.S. And there's still a lot of power there.
Shifting into like a political analysis on this, the railroad workers would have been strike was pretty much worked out by the Biden administration and the Democratic Party, because they could not afford to have a strike happen politically for them. And it also hurt the power of the workers. And this is one case where the power of the workers dictated to the political establishment what the terms of resolving a worker's needs would be. Usually it's the other way around. So the workers, basically railroad workers, controlled about 30% of the transportation in the United States. Had they gone on strike, it would have been a tremendous political problem for the Democrats. But so workers, we still can rule. We still can rule. We have to remember that there is a lot of latent power going on in the country right now. We just got to organize it, and it's happening. And I think we may have some more organizing news coming our way in a moment or so. Up here, as I mentioned, the graduate students in Greater Boston and east of Worcester, about 25,000 workers. They are, at least a couple of them are talking about a graduate workers industrial council, where you look at it as an industry and you wield power that way, where you have 25,000 workers make noise instead of just 5,000 here or 3,000 there. Of course, that's next level organizing that right now is in the embryonic stage of discussion, but it just points to, the kind of strategies that people are talking about. Another one of these incipient embryonic strategies is a coalition between Starbucks workers and the Teamsters, looking forward to June of next year, where the Teamsters likely will be going on strike. And as not to be repetitious, but to point out that up here in Boston, the 16 Starbucks stores just sends a letter of thanks to the Teamsters Local 25 up here, thanking them for not crossing the picket lines and delivering product and food to the longest strike that was happening up here, which was 64 days, which is now over, and the workers are going back to work this week. So
that's what's up, though.
Yeah, that's solidarity.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. Speaking of the East Coast and the Teamsters, Jerry and Rick, just wanted to bring attention to, there's a report on the More Perfect Union Facebook page. The last month, the DHL delivery driver workers, and might be others, were picketing, and they waited until all the politicians left. The police waited until all the politicians left, and then viciously attacked the picket line, breaking the bones of a couple, one sister worker, maybe others there, and they got a lot of support and from the Teamsters and still are. So just wanted to bring that to attention to people, and this is a confirmation of the example of that the cops only protect property and are on the side of the bosses. It was very clear. There's a video of this at the More Perfect Union Facebook page, but the DHL workers went right back to the picket line, right back to the strike, and kept it moving. And they're getting a lot of assistance with the Teamsters, and there's lawsuits happening, but they know the power is on the strike, on the picket line. So I just wanted to bring listeners' attention to that as well. And the video is on the More Perfect Union page.
That's right, man. You know, the cops never show up on the side of working people, man. You know, on a strike, the cops never show up on the side of the striking workers. National Guard never shows up on the side of working people, you know, or strikers. Yeah, that's their role. That's their role in class society.
That's it.
So finally, for me over here, at least, just an update from San Francisco. There were some airport restaurant workers that had been on strike recently, and just wanted to report that the strike ended after 3 days. And there they were represented by Unite Here, Local 2. It was about 1,000 workers. And after 3 days on strike, they received increased wages from $17.05 per hour to $22.05 per hour, as well as better health insurance and retirement plans. Those figures according to a publication called the San Francisco Eater. But hopefully it's true, and hopefully the workers are happy with those gains. Whatever they struggled for, I hope they won.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I'd just like to add one more for this podcast as well. Speaking of the docks and ship workers and railroad workers, we also have our friends, the fellow workers, the airline workers, and the flight attendants are involved in a lot of different activities. Of course, Sarah Nelson is the president of the Flight Attendants Union, is working with a variety of other unions, but there's a lot of campaigns going on for health and safety during the pandemic, and even now. A lot of the flight attendants are really getting attacked by passengers in a variety of different ways physically. They're working a lot of overtime, and it's a very heavy situations that a lot of them are facing. But they have a great union president, and there's a lot of campaigns going on with the flight attendants, but also with other workers on the ground, luggage handlers, etc., in a variety of airports across the country. So we want to extend our solidarity to them as well. We are paying attention to that work because that is an absolutely critical sector of the labor movement, along with the other ones we discussed. So thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast, bringing you today's labor news, history, and analysis. We will be back, and we will bring you more episodes, more news, more interviews, more themes, more labor themes. Until then, everyone, solidarity and love to all.